Okay, hey there! I left off last time talking about the early days of Marvel Comics, and while there is still so much to be said about them, for now, I'm going to wrap it up by talking about the Black Panther. Before I go into this character, though, I need to give this a little bit of historical context, because unfortunately, when it comes to the issue of race, comics have a rather problematic history. Now, don't get me wrong, in some ways, they can be very forward-thinking, but just like pretty much everything else in the United States, racism has crept its ugly head into the medium. The character that you see here is named Ebony White. He's the sidekick of the Spirit, a comic strip character created by Will Eisner, who I talked about in the 8th episode of this series. Let's get one thing out of the way. See the way that Ebony is drawn? Now, look at how the Spirit is drawn. Ebony is a racist caricature, whereas the Spirit is, call him a heroic ideal. While this doesn't excuse it, this is the standard way that black characters were drawn back then. So when Will Eisner created this character in the 1940s, he wasn't doing anything that pretty much everybody else was doing. In the interest of fairness, Ebony might have had the looks of a racist caricature, and his speech pattern was straight out of racist minstrel shows. He was known for being brave, intelligent, and resourceful. Now this, of course, won't excuse this depiction, but Eisner himself came to realize the problem with the character, and eventually phased him out of the strip. Now, according to Eisner, he received both criticism and praise for the character's depiction, and you can easily guess what was criticized and what was praised. In later comics by other artists like Darwin Cook, Ebony was drawn in a style that's more consistent with the other characters. So the point is that while in context, Ebony White might have been a relatively progressive depiction of an African American, it's still hugely problematic. Next up we have the Green Turtle. Now, he was never a very popular character, but I like to talk about him because of the legend that surrounds this character. Chu F-Hing was a Chinese-American comic book artist who introduced the hero in the first issue of Blazing Comics back in 1944. Now, the story goes that Hing wanted his character to also be Chinese-American. But it's 1944, and we're at war with Japan. Now, I know you might be thinking, but the Chinese were our allies. China and Japan are different. If you are thinking that, you're trying to make sense of racism, which you're only going to give yourself a headache if you do that. The thing is, there is no way that a comic book publishing company was going to have an Asian hero as the star of their comic. It didn't matter if he was Chinese or Chinese American, that sort of a thing just was not going to happen. However, if you look at the Green Turtle's appearance in the comic, you never see him without a mask, and you never get a clear look at his face. The legend of this story goes that as far as Hing was concerned, the Green Turtle was a Chinese-American hero. And while you could never confirm it within the pages, there's nothing to really contradict it either. Now, more recently, in 2014, creators Gene Yang and Sonny Liu, they did an awesome graphic novel called The Shadow Hero, where they rebooted the character and fully embraced the idea of him being Chinese-American. It's some great stuff, and I can't recommend the graphic novel anymore. In the 1970s, comic book creators jumped on board the blaxploitation phenomenon and introduced African-American superheroes like Power Man, better known to most people nowadays as Luke Cage, and Black Lightning. Now, both of these characters are smart, powerful, heroic. They're not anybody's sidekick or second fiddle, but they were still rooted in some common stereotypes. Luke Cage, he's an ex-convict. Black Lightning lives in a slum. Now, neither one of these are problematic just by themselves. However, when you only have a few African-American superheroes out there, it means these aren't quite as forward-thinking as perhaps they should have been. Don't get me wrong, they have their fans. They have their African-American fans as well. But you could acknowledge both the problematic nature and still enjoy all the things that are good and cool about these guys. Another notable character is Shang-Chi, a Chinese hero and martial arts expert, or to use his proper epithet, the Master of Kung Fu. Much like how Luke Cage, Black Lightning were capitalizing on the blaxploitation phenomenon, Shang-Chi was capitalizing on the popularity of Kung Fu movies. Now, again, nothing wrong with an Asian hero who is a martial arts expert, but still, this is a little bit of the stereotype that Asians know martial arts. If there were hundreds of Asian superheroes and Asian American superheroes, and a few of them were martial artists, that wouldn't be a problem. But again, it's playing up to the stereotypes. Don't get me wrong. He has his fans. They're making a movie. He's really cool. But again, we could acknowledge both the problem and what's good about the character. One more example is Vibe. He's a Puerto Rican superhero. He's introduced in the 1980s. Once again, strong, heroic character. His origin involved him being a former gang leader. So we pretty much have the same problem that we had with these other characters. Thankfully, when they introduced Vibe into the Flash TV show, they made him a mechanical engineer. They made him quite bright. So everything that's cool about Vibe is still there in the show, but you can get away from the stereotypes, and that's a bit better. Now, all this brings me back to the Black Panther and why he's so remarkable. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1966. The Black Panther originally appeared in an issue of the Fantastic Four. Now, he's essentially the opposite of what you might expect from a couple of white guys back in the mid-60s. Now, perhaps it's due to the fact that since they were both Jewish Americans, Lee and Kirby knew what it was like to be stereotyped, so they didn't want to make the same kinds of mistakes. For those who don't know the story, the Black Panther's secret identity is King T'Challa, the ruler of the fictional country of Wakanda. Not only is he a king, this country of his is depicted as a technological utopia way ahead of the rest of the world. T'Challa himself proves to be more than a match for the Fantastic Four, and the Fantastic Four are only able to defeat him with the unexpected help of a Native American character named Wyatt Wingfoot. Now, if you're getting a bit concerned saying, oh my gosh, okay, so you had this great African leader and he was the bad guy? For those of you who don't know your comic book superhero stories, let me tell you a common trope. Whenever heroes meet, first they fight, then they get together and they unite against the real threat. So the Black Panther's introduction was essentially following the same pattern that you can expect for any superhero. If you watch the first Avengers movie, before the Avengers all got together, they fought each other. People like to see superheroes fight, and that's true in the movies, it's true in the comics. So no, Black Panther wasn't set up as some kind of a villain. Not only that, but it turned out that the real villain was a guy named Ulysses Claw, a European who was in Wakanda in order to exploit its natural resources and steal their precious vibranium. Personally, I read this again recently, and I was quite blown away with the anti-colonialist message going on there. I hope you'll forgive me if I step out of my lane a bit here as a white comic book fan, but when the Black Panther movie came out, I noticed something similar to what I noticed when the Wonder Woman movie came out. And that is, it seemed like a new audience, or a different audience, was getting excited for this movie than the typical superhero movie. I saw it on social media. One of the best examples was from Mark Bernardin. He's a screenwriter / podcaster, and he tweeted this out. Walking through the mall today, passed by a black dude I've never seen before who nodded and said, Black Panther's in a month, yo. I repeat, Black Panther's in a month is the new what's up. I don't think I'm speaking too much out of turn when I say that this movie meant something important to a lot of black people. Check this out. It's from a video entitled Emotional Black Panther Reactions. I'm going to link the whole video. Check it out. It's worth seeing. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, on the other side of the tunnel from Oakland. I'm not saying that we don't have black people in my area, but they represent less than 4% of my city's population if the research that I did was correct. Now, while I didn't do a count, I think that the showing that I went to of the Black Panther, maybe about half the people there were African American. When I left the theater, I saw people posing for pictures in front of the movie poster. It's like this was an event. Now, superhero movies are pretty much always an event for me, but there was clearly something important going on here that while I might not fully understand it, I felt like I can appreciate it on some level nonetheless. The thing is, I'm not a religious guy. The closest thing I have to a religious ritual is I pick up new comic books every Wednesday and attend the nerd equivalent to the pilgrimage to Mecca comic book conventions. It's been a long time since I've been to the San Diego one, though. Now, fellow comic book fans have always felt few and far between while I was growing up. I felt like most people just didn't get superheroes because all they knew of them were some cheesy cartoons and mediocre movies. But now even more people are able to appreciate superheroes. And when I saw Black Panther fans posing in front of the poster, I felt like more people were joining my club. And to me, that's awesome. Enough from the white guy talking about what the Black Panther means to black people. There was one person in particular whom I remember having a lot of interesting things to say about the movie, both before it came out and after it came out. And he offered a perspective that I just did not have, and reading his various posts on social media felt like a bit of an education for me. So I reached out to him, his name's Alex, and I asked if he can contribute a little something. I would take anything, he could write a little something, a little paragraph. He was gracious enough to give me a video. Let's check out a few clips of it, and I'll post the entire thing for you to see.
So when the movie came out, it gave a lot of us an opportunity to celebrate that kind of independence. It was kind of rewarding to see so many people flock to the theaters to see a very unapologetically black, strong-willed king of Wakanda who dominated the box office. You have to take into account that for years, black geeks, writers, and celebrities were told that a black lead superhero would not sell, could not be made because it would never recoup its investment. They were told that black audiences would not show up or didn't have the money. White audiences would reject the idea of it being completely foreign, which I kind of get. Now, we had many stories in the movie that resonated with African Americans in particular, the story of T'Challa, but also the story of Killmonger, the forgotten son. He was villainous, but the movie really was very nuanced. The Killmonger character was also very nuanced.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
The discussion of the African continent forgetting its forgotten sons, its people in America, that wasn't lost. Right? That hit me personally. Similar convictions or conversations have occurred over the years when trying to resolve the reality that some empires were complicit in the African slave trade. Again, a complex, nuanced issue, but the pain that resonated was very real. The connection between father and son, which plays heavily in the dialogue of African Americans, this too was also very present. There was something for everyone. Same with the representations of strong yet vulnerable black women. And the reality is black women have been reduced on, historically, big and small screen. But here you had a spectrum of power and vulnerability. And the smartest person in the room was the independently minded, funny, loyal, and powerful tiny Shuri.
Okay, Shuri, I got him. What do I do?
Shoot them down, genius!
You had it all. It gave many of us a sense of being seen, even if for a moment. We don't always get education from where we came, but rarely do we really address the impact of the Kush Empire, Carthage, Mali, or the leaders and warriors, the women of the Doimi Empire, the tribes of the Nile, how the name Shaka resonated with invaders, or Mansa Musa, or Musa the First of Mali, once the wealthiest man in modern history. We got a little bit of all of that, or hints of those in this movie. The movie was a culmination of stories, a snowball picking up fragments from an often ignored storyline, landing squarely in the lap of a modern fantasy for us to digest. And we knew what it meant to see the story on the big screen. If you haven't seen it yet, and you have time and access, give it a watch. while trying to see it, try and see it through a different lens. Try and see it through the lens of someone who's never seen themselves on that screen in that way ever before.
We're definitely not where we need to be. Hopefully we can keep moving in the right direction with this. So, until next time,